Good afternoon. I'm Stephan Davis, and I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the American Academy of Nursing's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Committee. Thank you so much for joining us today. As a reminder, we do have closed captioning available for this event. A recording of this webinar will be sent to all registrants and posted on the Academy's website and YouTube channel. So I'm pleased to welcome you and my colleagues who will be presenting along with me today. Dr. Ernest Grant, who chairs the Fellow Selection Committee, Dr. Laura Wood, who is co-chair of that committee, and our EDI Committee Vice Chair, Dr. Gloria Chan. I want to recognize and thank the members of both the EDI Committee and the Fellow Selection Committee for the important work they do and for the collaboration on this webinar. The Academy staff is dropping a link in the chat to view the members of the EDI Committee and the Fellow Selection Committee. So combined, we have about 50 fellows who volunteer and serve on both of these important bodies within the Academy. So as we think about getting started, I wanted to share our statement on the commitment to shared excellence. And you can see this here on the slide. This was developed by the EDI committee and approved by the board this year. Our commitment to cultivating belonging in the fellowship and supporting shared excellence really is foundational to everything that we do. So it is our hope that we showcase both our own experiences and other diverse backgrounds that really highlight the breadth of experience within the Academy Fellowship and our unique pathways and journeys. So when we think about the FAAN credential, that is what we all have in common and obviously what is shared. As we move on, I wanted to highlight when we think about the Academy statement on shared excellence and looking at how we bring people into the Academy, again, who have a diverse array of experiences, areas of expertise, but also different lived experiences. I wanted to share this iceberg model, which comes from Jennifer Brown's book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And it really illustrates the myriad ways people differ. Above the waterline represents elements of difference that we may see or experience in some way, and perhaps this is why they are often most focused on. But from our perspective, we really do mean all of the ways people differ when we consider our fellowship and in our pursuit of creating healthy lives for all people. While not an exhaustive set of examples of what may be above or below the waterline, we do know that people come to the fellowship with different lived experiences, intersecting identities, and again, areas of expertise. That is what makes the experience of becoming a fellow and the lifelong engagement with the Academy so rich, and it further enables us to make enduring impact in nursing, health, and healthcare. So now I'll hand it over to Ellie.
Thank you, Stephan. Hello, everyone. I am Ellie Cook, the Associate Director of Communications at the Academy, and have the privilege of serving as the staff liaison to the EDI committee. I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A session after our presentation. At any time during the session, please enter your questions into the Q&A box on the screen. It looks like this. And following our presentation, we'll make sure there's ample time to respond to those. Unfortunately, we cannot answer specific questions about an individual's application or the reasoning behind if someone was not accepted. Additional Academy staff are on this webinar to help monitor the chat to ensure as many questions as possible are answered. And please note that we do have the chat currently activated, and the chat is meant for friendly dialogue and comments during the session. We do reserve the right to disable the chat function if there's an influx of inappropriate or disruptive comments, so please help us maintain a respectful environment throughout this discussion. With that being said, if you would like to comment in the chat, I welcome you to note where you are joining us from. And due to the number of attendees, I just want to highlight again, we might not be able to get to all questions, but we will do our best to answer as many as possible. We sincerely appreciate your participation and interest in joining the fellowship and in the Academy. And now I'll turn it back over to Dr. Davis.
Thanks so much, Ellie, for those housekeeping notes. And again, we look forward to your engagement. And we are so excited to share some insights from our experiences. And again, I think that you'll see from our fellowship journeys that there are many different paths to getting to the FAAN designation. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I was inducted as a fellow of the Academy in 2022. At that time, I was serving as an assistant dean for inclusive excellence and belonging and an assistant professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. Like some of you here today, I had an unconventional path to that role and to Academy Fellowship. So prior to transitioning to academia, I served in progressively responsible management roles in hospitals and health systems, health insurance companies, and in leadership and governance roles for various organizations. When I think back to my application, the significant and sustained contributions to nursing, health, and healthcare that I highlighted included my efforts guiding organizations to achieve leadership status with the Human Rights Campaign and their Healthcare Quality Index. And then through national education initiatives, I expanded the reach of that work through looking at how we educate executives who are leading organizations. How do we get them to understand the criteria, moving beyond the work that I was doing at individual healthcare systems and hospitals? So looking at how I increased or contributed to the increase of the growth in applications and actually designated facilities as well. I also presented and published elements of this work in the inaugural Hastings Center Special Report on LGBT Bioethics. So again, thinking not only the work that you're doing in your organization, but how are you disseminating it is a really important point as we think about the fellowship application. This work and other national efforts, such as my contributions to the Josiah Macy Foundation report on addressing harmful bias and eliminating discrimination in health professions learning environments, serving as a fellow and national faculty member for the American College of Healthcare Executives, or also known as ACHE, chairing that organization's LGBTQ plus healthcare leaders community, and my work serving as ACHE region at large, a role that was created to foster diversity in the governance of ACHE. And all of these were highlighted as examples of enduring impact both within and beyond the nursing discipline. I framed the uniqueness of being deeply embedded in two disciplines, looking at both nursing and health administration, as being important to expanding the reach and impact of our profession. My application also highlighted my work teaching thousands of nurse executives and leaders and the broader healthcare executive community as they were preparing for nurse executive board certification and also fellowship with ACHE. This work continues today in my work as a fellow and faculty member for both ACHE and the American Organization for Nursing Leadership. I was really fortunate to have opportunities for impactful leadership and influence early in my career. But I will say my earliest exposure to nurse leaders who had the FAAN credential were nursing faculty at the University of Maryland when I was in their BSN program. These were typically full professors and highly seasoned academicians who were really at the pinnacles of their career. Conversely, I was 36 at the time of my application submission and only 15 years into my work in the profession. So I credit my successful application at that time to amazing mentors I've had over the years, including Dr. Ken White, former president of the Academy and the first man to serve in that role. And actually, as it happens, Dr. Ernest Grant, first man to lead the ANA, who joins us here today. And, Dr. Grant gave me excellent advice. He told me that I should really consider applying for the Academy because he thought that my work mattered. And he gave me the suggestion to do so with no firm expectations on being accepted, especially given that I was early career. He said if I got in, it would be impactful for me. But if I didn't get in, to just reapply, dust it off again and submit it. And eventually, he was confident that I would achieve the desired outcome and be able to contribute to the work of the Academy. I also have to credit my sponsors, Dr. Hussein Tahan, who's at MedStar Health. He was my primary sponsor, and he really is the reason that I applied in 2022. I tried to delay one more year because I had just made a professional role transition. And he pushed me to get it done. He said, I predict that if you delay this one more time, next year we're going to be in the same situation and you're going to say, life is too hard. I'm too busy. We're always going to be busy. When are we not busy when we think about it reflectively? So important to have those people in your corner who are going to help accelerate your timeline. So he pushed me to get it done that year, and Dr. Dawn Aycock, who I previously worked with at Georgia State University as faculty. They both played a tremendous role in my success, providing expert guidance on the narrative, and I remain tremendously grateful to both of them. I'm also really thankful to have opportunities that continue today to contribute to the Academy's work. But, that really began immediately once I was inducted. So I was inducted in October of 2022. Immediately, I had an invitation to serve on the EDI committee, subsequently served as vice chair and now chair. I'm also now an elected member of the fellow selection committee, so under Dr. Grant and Dr. Wood's leadership. And, uniquely, because I'm originally a music major before I transitioned to nursing school, but I was studying jazz performance at New School University in New York. And so some of you have heard me play saxophone. If you were at the 50th anniversary celebration in 2023, you heard me play That's What Friends Are For. And I jokingly say that's what fans are for, because we are a community of scholars and friends together in the Academy. I now have the pleasure of serving as Senior Executive Director for Health Professions Education at RisePoint. And so I think that, given that I've transitioned to a national ed tech company, you can see my sort of unconventional journey continues. We support 30K students in the health professions all over the nation. And I also still get to teach and do work that I love with students at Georgetown University as an associate professor. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Grant so he can share his legendary journey. And congratulations again on your tremendous honor.
Thank you, Stephan. Good morning to everyone, or afternoon, depending on where in the globe that you may be. I believe that Stephan was referring to the fact that I am a fellow with the most tenure, so to speak, on this panel. I think not only because I was just recently named a living legend of the Academy this year, but also because I was inducted as a FAAN in 2011. We can host a whole separate webinar about the Academy's living legend status. So I won't go into details about that now, but it is quite an honor. My day job is I'm currently the Vice Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Duke University School of Nursing. However, at the time when I was made the application to become a fellow, I was the Director of Outreach for the North Carolina J.C. Burns Center at UNC Hospitals in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and also serving as faculty or adjunct faculty with the UNC School of Nursing. So I was asked by two of my colleagues, Dr. Lorna Harris and Dr. Ed Halloran, two colleagues who I really, they were great mentors for me, but they thought that I met more than met the criteria to be an Academy member. I didn't think that the work that I was doing was good enough, but they convinced me that it was. And I was told that it was very difficult to get accepted for the first time, but that it wasn't impossible. And just as Stephan had just mentioned, as I had mentioned to him. One thing that you will note as you start this process, or at least it was for me, is that it's very hard to write about yourself, let alone deciding on what to focus on when you're involved in so many things as I was. But my sponsors and I, we had a couple of meetings to decide which one of my accomplishments I would focus on. The meetings were necessary because even though they knew about me and my work, they needed to get clarity of my work. And you may encounter some of the same things in that your sponsors or others may be just familiar with the summary of your work, but not the full impact of your work as well. But during those meetings, they questioned me about which one of my achievements that I was most proud of. Was it the implementation of a statewide burn prevention program, or training military personnel as they got ready to deploy to Afghanistan and Iraq, about the immediate care of burns, or many of the other things that I've been working on as well. So after much discussion, though, we did decide that I would write about the statewide fire and burn prevention program as my primary focus. This program is called Learn Not to Burn, and the burn center that I worked for at the time, we used funds to purchase books for every teacher in grades K through 6 within the state of North Carolina. This is a unique curriculum because it's designed so that no matter what subject the students are taking, there's some form of fire and burn prevention that can be taught. Initially, there were 25 key fire and burn life safety behaviors for grades 3 through 6, and for K through 12, there was about 8 that the kids learned. And I'll give you a quick example. Like if it's science that the students were learning, then they would learn 3 things about what it takes for fire to grow. They also learned about how to respond to the sound of a smoke alarm, or how to call 911 and go to a safe place, things like that. But there were also lessons like if there was math or music or social studies or history, there were lessons that were associated with that as well. I also collaborated with the North Carolina Department of Education and local fire departments and did a lot of train-the-trainer sessions for teachers. But the big thing was that on any given day, we estimated that about 65,000 K through 6th graders in our state were learning about fire and burn safety behaviors. There was also training updates that we did for teachers as well. And in addition, we provided smoke alarms for those who are identified as being in need of that. So the biggest benefit of this program is that it is documented that it saved lives. We knew of at least 10 families that had a fire to start in their homes, and the kids remained calm, but the parents said that they panicked, and it wasn't for the fact that the kids, had learned those lessons and they knew what to do that saved people's lives. But the main reason that I chose that program, though, was that it was the sustainability factor. In the publications that we had done to document the success of this program as well. We could document the training, the number of kids who participated in the collaboration with community partners, the fire service, social services, the local PTA, the Board of Education, and also the funding support to support this program as well. The program is still active today and has spread to other schools, even charter schools, and a few private schools as well. So this is a perfect example of the sustained work that is not only local, but statewide. I also started a program with the fire department in Johannesburg, South Africa, and also implementing a similar program for them in some of the surrounding cities in South Africa as well. My sponsors, once they were able to comprehend the extent of the program, were able to write supporting letters that amplified my work. But they did not repeat what I had written, but elaborated on the extent to which the work made an impact reducing fire and burn injuries within our state. I'm very thankful for my sponsors who made me write and rewrite my application at least 4 times. We started early because based on their experience sponsoring others, they knew that the write-up would need to be rewritten multiple times to get your main point across in such a few words. And that's certainly the most crucial advice that I can give those of you who are thinking about applying to start working on your write-up now. Since becoming a member of the Academy, I've participated in a number of events and committees. As president of the ANA, I was featured in a welcome video for new inductees, and then within Academy President Dr. Eileen Sullivan Marks, and secondly with Dr. Ken White. I also provided the ANA's president's address to the general business meeting and participated in one of the opening keynote speakers in 2024. I've sponsored and co-sponsored at least 10 successful applicants, and I've served on the Academy Selection Committee for the past 6 or 7 years and will serve as an advisor when my term ends this year. I've been blessed to receive the Academy's Civitas Award and, as mentioned earlier, being named as a living legend. This is the highest honor that an Academy member can have bestowed upon them, and I'm honored to be included in such powerhouse in the nursing profession, people who have blazed a trail not only for myself, but for others. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Gloria to comment on her experiences. Gloria?
Great. Thank you so much, Ernest, for sharing your history with the Academy. I'm happy to share my insights about my experience as a more recent inductee. I've been a fellow now for 3 years. I was inducted in 2023, what I would like to lovingly call joining the family. It also happened to be the year the Academy celebrated its 50th anniversary. So it is nice to know that it was Stephan that played the saxophone during that, because I had no idea. And that was just a wonderful experience overall. I could say I can speak to the experience of being a fellow whose career spans both practice and academia, as I am a CRNA at Staten Island University Hospital in New York and a nursing professor at Hofstra. So overall, my background is that I am still a full-time practicing certified registered nurse anesthetist in New York City. And also at the time, I was adjunct faculty at Hofstra University in its dual NP-CRNA program since its inception, also located in New York. At the time, I had also been elected as vice president of Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing. And I was immensely proud that I was the first CRNA and the first Asian American elected in that role, and then had a lot of other volunteer and committee roles in the end. So one of the questions that most people always ask is, what made you decide to apply for fellowship? And I would say my honest answer was, it actually was not my idea. So one of my sponsors was Dr. Jose Alejandro, and we were serving together on the Sigma Nursing Board of Directors. And after one of our board meetings, he drove me to the airport. And I remember it was snowing and raining, and we just started our drive, and he looked over at me and said, "You need to apply to become a fellow." And I laughed because I really thought he was just joking and playing around. But by the end of that car ride, I had that, that 80-20 moment where I was thinking 80% of it was, this is what a joke. Like, this is not real. Absolutely not. I'm not good enough. And then there was that little bit, 20% thinking like, what if I did? And what if I tried? Looking back, I realized the biggest issue that I had at the time was thinking I hadn't been in nursing long enough. Actually, I think we're about the same age, Stephan. So at the time, I was around the same age, and I was thinking, like, there are people, decades of experience, have done so much in the world, and who am I to be trying to do something like this? And at the time, I just truly didn't think I was ready, because I just simply did not have the time yet. I was like 15 years in nursing. That's not enough for anything. What I didn't realize, though, and now that I can look back, is that I was just so busy doing work, volunteering for this, doing this and that, following just whatever opportunity is there, opportunity after opportunity, and just saying yes to things, that I hadn't really stopped to recognize the impact that I had already made. So after that conversation, it really took about a week for me until I decided I'm fully locked in and I'm going to start working on my application. So as Ernest had mentioned, the hardest part is really doing the application, writing it, and then really reflecting and thinking about what's my impact. For me, I thought it was quite challenging because, first and foremost, I consider myself a full-time bedside clinician and an academic second, and I loved both of those aspects of me. So I pretty much assumed that my application should really be focused on what my day job is. But then as I was looking through my own CV, I realized that the work that shaped my career wasn't really a single clinical or academic achievement, but it was really my involvement in professional nursing organizations. So my very first draft of many, the first draft was basically, I wrote what my CV said, and I wrote my CV in essay format. That was every single presentation, every leadership role, every committee, every conference that I ever attended. So Jose, being a very kind sponsor, read it and said, "This is very strong, but what does that actually lead to?" And I think he was being so kind, number one, but also trying to gently push a subtle point that the application itself, it's not asking you to summarize your CV. It's not telling you to do that. It's really asking you to explain what your impact was. So ultimately, it takes multiple revisions and reflections, I would say. But I realized that all those experiences were connected by a common thread. So for me, professional organizations had given me opportunities I never could have imagined, which included serving on an international board of directors, becoming a United Nations representative, speaking as a clinical subject matter as a CRNA during COVID, speaking at the UN on the status of women and how nursing ties into supporting women around the world, and then mentoring others to become United Nations representatives themselves. In addition, my personal interest was really about the well-being of resident registered nurse anesthetists, or RRNAs, and the importance of mentorship, specifically within the nurse anesthesia field itself. So as a student, I created a mentorship program in my actual school program. And then I made that as a focus for my doctoral program, which has continued to create more doctoral program or doctoral projects. And then overall continued mentorship in my everyday field, both as a clinician, as an academic now. So overall, all these experiences, these individual experiences really just felt like opportunities I was really lucky to be part of. So it was anything that I was just really interested about, passionate about, or just because I was free and I wanted to see what that was like. So collectively, though, they represented something much bigger. And overall, I realized that my impact wasn't about just being a clinician, an educator, or a leader, but it was truly about advocacy and showing professional organizations as the platform to elevate nursing leadership, create opportunities for others, and to advocate for the profession and mentor the next generation of nurse leaders, all while continuing to practice clinically and remain active in academia. More importantly, I identified that my impact wasn't just about what I already did, but what was to come. And I was laying the groundwork for others to be able to do the same thing, so that I had a clear vision of this is what I did for myself. How can I make sure that's better for somebody else? It was more than what I could do alone, but I was trying to create these tangible opportunities for people and to empower them to do it as well. So from there, my application had a cohesive narrative, or what I consider more of like a theme versus just a list of accomplishments. And once I figured out that narrative or that theme, I found it was much easier to write what was supposed to be in that application, and also really what I should just not include, because that's just too much. The other part is just choosing the sponsors is really important. Jose Alejandro was my first sponsor, and he believed in me before I believed in myself. And he really encouraged me to apply and help me recognize my own impact. My second sponsor was Dr. Elizabeth Weathers. She also was serving on the Sigma board of directors at the time. And she was such a gentle, wonderful person. And she really just refined what I was writing in a better way. So ultimately, some of the best sponsors, and I loved all my sponsors that did this for me, that they're not just writing something for you or writing their sponsorship letter. They are trying to help you articulate and refine what your individual impact is, and they help you get there. So since being inducted as a fellow, I discovered and realized that fellowship is really just the beginning. Obviously, I was extremely honored to be part of this. Having this recognition was truly the honor of a lifetime. I cried when I got my email saying that I was accepted. So it was one of the most wonderful moments of my life. And it really affirmed that the work I was doing, that I devoted my however long career, that it actually truly mattered. But what was even more meaningful than being inducted was feeling that responsibility of earning that distinction and having the opportunity to continue to contribute. And I wanted to live up to what the Academy represented and to devote my time and whatever my specific expertise was to advancing its mission. What's been fantastic is that the Academy is an active and working organization. So if you are following with some of the things that they put out multiple policy statements, position statements, briefs. The Academy has many moving parts to it. So being actively involved in any aspect of it has been one of the most rewarding parts of this experience. So as a practicing CRNA, I joined the acute and critical care expert panel just because I felt it was like a natural fit for my clinical expertise. At the same time, I watched as the profession and the world becoming increasingly complex. So I was pretty compelled by what the Academy's commitment was to bringing the people together and empowering us to work toward a shared vision. So that led me to serve on the EDI committee, and where now I have the privilege of serving as the vice chair. So ultimately, earning the FAAN title is one thing, but the impact that you have, and that's using your expertise, your voice, your passion to move the profession forward, is way more important. There's so much work to be done, and I'm so grateful that I have an opportunity to be part of it. So if I have one piece of advice, is that when you're thinking about what to do for this, it's not just simply thinking about what I've done, but almost thinking about what am I trying to say about myself, because a strong fellowship application isn't just about your list of accomplishments or things you've done or places you've been to. It's a very cohesive narrative that explains who you are, the impact you've made, and why your voice belongs in the Academy. So thank you for allowing me the time to share my little bit. And then I'm going to hand it over to Laura. Laura, could you please share your reflections about becoming a FAAN and its continued impact on your career?
Absolutely, Gloria. Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing your story as well. So I was inducted into the Academy in 2021, and you might know there was a little bit going on in the world at that time. It was right in the middle of the kind of the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think my experience was a little bit unique. I wore a mask at my induction. I was able to bump elbows with the president of the Academy, but not touch anyone. We tapped elbows as a safety precaution. It looks a little silly now that we think about it going back, but it was really a warm and wonderful occasion, and really not diminished because of the COVID experience. I will say that out of an abundance of caution, I even asked my family to not come. But you'll see by this banner, which really touched me at the time, Dr. Judy Beal, who was a close colleague of mine, and she's the Dean Emeritus at Simmons, put forward a sponsorship note on the screen, one of the ways that people can help to recognize inductees. And it was a reach out from somebody from afar. And I think that's the kind of human connection that I have felt deeply as an Academy member, both with folks who were helping to support my transition to the Academy over more than a decade. And I'll tell you my story a little bit about that. So I'm one of those folks who thought about this an awfully long time before I actually applied. But the warmth and the fellowship has continued now that I've been a fellow over the last 5 years. I do want to say just a little bit about my current role. For the past 13 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the first SVP, and now I'm the Executive Vice President of Patient Care Operations and System Chief Nurse Executive at Boston Children's. And I consider my professional priorities and practice areas as being deeply rooted in practice. But I also worked in industry for more than 15 years within Siemens Healthcare. And a lot of my time over my entire career trajectory has also really been invested in academic and practice partnerships. So in some ways you could say I felt like, and I still feel like, a little bit of a intentional generalist, and I like that. But I think that was part of my dilemma of really trying to focus and think about where my impacts had really been most important. So I eventually, after having significant industry experience, went back to school, went back to Johns Hopkins, got my DNP. I became a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow, and then pursued this opportunity starting in 2012 at Boston Children's. And throughout this time, both when I was in industry, I had a number of people around me, Dr. Rosemary Kennedy, other colleagues within Siemens, who said, you know, you really should be thinking about pursuing fellowship. And again, it was my own lack of self-confidence, and also, I think, committing myself to some deep reflection to really think about where my impacts were. I would say this journey does require committed focus, some time away from your daily activities, even away from family, to really focus deeply on where your impacts have been. And Gloria, I love how you stated this, that it's far more than just decomposing resume. I actually did an exercise that sounds a little bit like yours. I literally decomposed my resume, put it on Post-it notes on my home office wall, and then clustered them. And that's how I began to see what were my areas of, where were the commonalities and where were the areas where I had really felt I had made the most difference. But so one of my words of encouragement to people who may be listening to this webcast today is to act with more urgency. There are so many benefits to being a member of the Academy, and to leap before you feel ready. I often use the phrase "sleep and the net will appear." None of us feel completely ready as we take on new challenges in life, and I would encourage people to be brave and to step forward and to do it with people who know them well and who know their work well, who can advise them in addition to what they see in themselves. So I'll tell you a little bit about my mentorship and sponsorship journey. I had over more than 10 years, a number of people who I spoke with once or twice a year, and would speak at a high level, really trying to sift what some of my strengths were and areas of impact. And I actually evolved a set of sponsors once I became more clear on really where my areas of impact were. So I had the benefit of some people who said, you might want to think about having so-and-so and so-and-so be your sponsor instead of me, and who really knew my work deeply. So ultimately, Dr. Roy Simpson was one of my sponsors, and I had worked with him deeply when he was the CNO at Cerner and at McKesson when I was at Siemens. But importantly, I chaired the AMIA Public Policy Committee. There's a nursing informatics working group, and I had worked closely with Dr. Simpson during that time, and he was an amazing, encouraging sponsorship who challenged me to remember that half the things I had done I didn't even include in my CV or my resume. So I had to rebuild my career trajectory in my own mind about where I had accomplished things, where I had impacted change over time. And my second sponsor was Dr. Patricia Pat Reed Ponte. She was the SVP and CNO at Dana-Farber, and many of you know there's a bridge between Dana-Farber and Boston Children's. We collaborated closely together, but she also was a member of our Quality and Safety Board Committee that I served on as well. And one of my areas of impact where I was able to bring practice and IT and digital health together was around work that I led soon after I arrived at Boston Children's, as we pursued as an organization being a high reliability organization, and really did a major culture shift around how we were going to prioritize employee safety and patient safety within our organization. Proudly, I can share that not only did we reduce serious safety events by more than 50% 5 years ago, that has been sustained now for more than a decade. And so Pat saw that level of contribution, and then I was really able to disseminate that well beyond the walls of Boston Children's, spoke at many national conferences, published on this work in many settings, both in practice and in informatics settings and academic settings as well. I think that the other thing that I would say is that I started going to the health policy conference regularly, and I attended for more than 10 years. So I'm embarrassed to say, how could I go for 10 years and not feel more ready? But it was a little bit of distractions in life. I was balancing family priorities. I was the caretaker for about really four aging parents, and just balancing life demands. And that led me to say, okay, maybe next year. But I finally got really focused on it. And once I did, I was fortunate to apply and be accepted the first year that I applied. And I think it was the work and the encouragement and the contributions of so many people. I'll also just talk about the impact of alumni relationships. A former Academy president, Diana Mason, and I are WVU alums, and we just met informally more than 20 years ago. And And she planted those seeds early on. So the networks that you create are often people who know the essence of you well, and really became an important force for me thinking about my career trajectory differently. So, in addition to attending the health policy conferences, a few things that I just noted here, I joined the expert panel on building healthcare excellence and was active in a number of work efforts there. I became a sponsor for an individual who became an edge runner, Dr. Vivian Williams, who's a nurse practitioner at Boston Children's. And while I'm not able to sponsor anyone into the Academy of Nursing for a period of time because I've been on the Fellowship Selection Committee for 5 years, I have tried to be an encouraging presence for people to think about pursuing Academy membership. I've facilitated breakout sessions at the Academy. I've been an active attendee at the Institute for Nursing Leadership at INL. And again, I was appointed first to the Fellowship Selection Committee for my first term, and then I was an elected member of the second term, and have had the great pleasure of serving as the co-chair with Dr. Grant as the chair over this last year. And I think another thing that I would just note is the professional relationships that one grows through Academy membership have many tentacles and long arms that have really enriched me personally and professionally. So Dr. Grant was the president of ANA during COVID. I had joined the board of ANCC, so we had gotten to know each other there. I now serve as the president and board chair of ANCC, and we've been able to collaborate on many important work efforts together. So these relationships have just fundamentally brought me great joy, enriched my professional development, and really reshaped who I am. And more than any other organization that I've been part of, I would say it's happened through my connections with the Academy. So I think I will pause there and just look forward to the question and answer portion when we get there. And now hand this back over to Stephan and to Gloria, who can provide a bit more of an overview of the organization. And then I think Ernest is next to share some insights, and I'll join him around the fellowship selection process. So thank you all.
Thank you. And all I have to say is, wow, it's just amazing to listen to my colleagues here. And I will say that this is one of the best parts of being part of the Academy, because you have conversations with people who have done the most extraordinary work. So it's just always exciting, and you're always learning something new. So, I think that it's really important as we think about the Academy being both an honorific society, but also we're a policy organization. And I will just highlight in the application process, tying your work to policy in some way, because that is the focus of what we do here. Fellows do encompass, however, a wide range of perspectives, experiences, and expertise, as you've already heard. But the common thread that I also hope that you heard is that we're all transforming healthcare and health in our own ways. And there's implications for policy in everything that we do. I want to emphasize that FAAN is not just a credential to add to your signature, although we do look forward to you applying and being inducted and adding that to the signature line. FAAN always is last in the signature and the string of credentials that many of us have. So it really does hold a prominent place when we think about our work in policy and in the profession and beyond. And one of the things that's also really interesting and unique about the Academy is that our fellows become members for life. They renew their dues well into their 90s. And in fact, our oldest fellow is 101. So it's really great to see the lifelong commitment of our fellowship. With more than 3,400 fellows, the Academy represents nursing's most accomplished leaders who work towards our mission to improve health and to achieve health equity through policy and through nursing leadership, innovation, and science. FAAN is widely regarded as the highest honor in the discipline, and regardless of what other fellowship designations you may hold, and I know a little about this from a personal perspective, as I hold 7 other fellowship designations, but for the nursing profession, from my vantage point, FAAN is the most prestigious and opens the greatest doors to expand your reach and impact. And now I'll turn it over to Gloria.
Thank you, Stephan. I hope to join your club one day. As you mentioned, selection into the academy is a significant recognition in nursing. Some, myself included, do consider it the most prestigious. So while the process can be daunting, we hope to shed some light on fellows who are selected. So each year, the academy receives hundreds of fellowship applications. This year, there was a 62% acceptance rate. Dr. Wood will discuss acceptance trends in depth in a moment, but for now, I wanted to highlight some of the demographic data from the previous 3 cohorts from 2023 to 2025. For fellows who are selected and participate in an induction ceremony held during the Academy's annual Health Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., from which you could have seen some of the photos of us from each of our own inductions earlier on in the presentation. After an individual is selected to participate in the induction ceremony, they are formally accepted into the organization and may use the FAAN credential, signifying that they are a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, or FAAN. This and the next slide show the diversity represented in the past 3 fellow inductee classes. As you can see, over the past 3 years, fellowship has continued to expand in its diversity. Each class represents a wide variety of nurses across age, ethnicity, expertise, and professional roles. So from this slide, you could see gender-wise, it's nearly 88% female, 11.5% male, and 0.5% non-binary. Race, mostly white, but the recent inductees represent a wide variety of backgrounds. And age-wise, we have an age range of 31 to 84. I think we still have that outlier of some older individuals, but I guess that's for the membership. But 61 to 70 range represents the largest percentage at 30%. And we are hoping to see more representation in the coming years coming from Gen X, Gen Y, or Millennials, or Gen Z. It is important to emphasize that the Academy and the Fellows Selection Committee do not have a particular image of a nurse in mind when they're looking at the application. We welcome and encourage nurses from all backgrounds to apply. So in this following slide, we're showing that the demographics related to the professional background. Academy Fellows are unique because we represent the breadth and depth of the profession, and we make an impact across varying populations, organizations, and environments. As you can see, fellows serve in a wide range of roles from deans, hospital executives, elected officials, state and federal political appointees and government officials, university presidents, chancellors, faculty, researchers, entrepreneurs, nurse scientists, association executives, and in so many different positions, I couldn't name them all. Again, there is no limit, no quota, or threshold the Fellow Selection Committee seeks when reviewing applications. We are looking for impact makers from all aspects of nursing and all nurses, regardless of role, age, gender, background, or experience. So now I'm going to turn it over to the Academy's Fellow Selection Committee Chair, Ernest Grant, to review the application process, who will speak to this more.
Thank you, Stephan and Gloria, for that overview. I will now pivot to discuss the fellowship application. The fellowship application typically opens in early January. It remains open for about 6 weeks, closing about mid-February. However, prospective candidates and applicants should begin the process much earlier. And as you recall, remember I said I started mine pretty early, writing my application. They must identify and work with their sponsors or 2 fellows who can serve as their recommenders and write sponsor statements on their behalf to attest to their impact early on. For any fellow who are on the webinar with us today, I want to strongly encourage you to support and sponsor applicants. And for those of you who haven't sponsored yet, please consider doing so, as this is a way to help booster the expertise and long-term sustainability of the Academy. The Academy seeks to be a representative body of nursing and to expand our impact while upholding our rigorous admission standards. Your sponsorship of candidates helps us to maintain that balance. Now, to apply for a fellowship, applicants must complete a series of questions that demonstrate how their individual contribution has significant, substantive, and sustained impact on health, as well as how their work advances the Academy's mission and work. Applicants also fill out an online CV form and provide sponsor statements from 2 Academy Fellows who can attest to their impact. The CV format was standardized in recent years with online application portals to ensure consistency in length and the format across the applications. Applicants must work closely with their sponsors throughout the application process. The sponsor statement shall amplify the applicant's contribution and impact, which requires your sponsor to know you as well. I highly recommend meeting your sponsors throughout the process of prepping your application materials. There's also an application fee that is required for submission. In the application itself, you'll be asked to describe your individual contributions as well as the significant, substantive, and sustained impact of your work. The Academy has provided definition on these key terms, which are listed on the website. So I also want to take a moment to emphasize that fellows also range in terms of their career stage. So please keep in mind that, and don't be discouraged by the terminology sustained impact if you're an early career or mid-career nurse. I want to propose a few questions to you as you consider reflecting on moving forward with an application. First, how would you define your body of work and primary, secondary areas of impact, be that regional, national, and/or international level? How does the Academy of Nursing Fellowship align with your career trajectory, past, present, and future, and accomplishments? Have you disseminated your work? What leadership roles at the regional, national, and/or international levels have you held, and what has been your impact? Who are fellows, those that hold the FAAN credential, that can attest to your significance and enduring contribution and sponsor you? And finally, I just want to turn it over to Laura, who will discuss the selection process and provide some advice about sponsors. Laura?
Thank you, Ernest. So I'd like to add a few additional points, and it's important to note that prior to the application review, the committee members identify any conflicts of interest. So when I say committee members, I mean the Fellowship Selection Committee members. So seeing only a list of names, people are really asked to identify, would they have a conflict of interest, and should they exclude themselves from any further review of an application. So this is done up front, and then occasionally someone will recognize that they may have a later conflict. They would withdraw at that time. That's really an important part to make sure that the applications are reviewed in a really balanced way. So there's first the identification of the conflicts of interest. The second thing is that there's an orientation session for all fellow selection committee members, even prior members. So it's something that we do annually together as a team. There's also an unconscious bias training that's hosted by a third party. And this individual is really a nationally recognized leader who's been really helpful to the group in helping us think about the different kinds of biases that are amongst us all and that we need to be sensitive to. And then there's also a mock review session where we work together as a group and in small groups to think through how we consider the strengths of different kinds of applications. And they're representative of applications that span academia, practice, entrepreneurs, and other settings. So really a broad range. The Fellowship Selection Committee and the International Subcommittee members. There's 9 members of a subcommittee you see here on the screen. This group was put together about 3 years ago. They fold in under the Fellowship Selection Committee, so under the leadership of the co-chairs and the full committee, but making sure that we have the perspective of people who are working internationally and who are closer to the work of international applicants. The Fellowship Selection Committee and the International Subcommittee members, consisting of nearly 40 elected and appointed members, are then grouped into teams of 3, which we call triads. So some of you may know that in past years, there were dyads that reviewed each application. And this past year was the first year that we moved to a triad model. And we actually expanded the size of the Fellowship Selection Committee in order to be able to accomplish this. The transition to triads was implemented with an intent to really further bolster inter-rater reliability. And I spoke a little bit about the International Subcommittee that was launched in October of 2023. And we're grateful for their contributions in full partnership as part of the Fellowship Selection Committee. So a little bit of how the work occurs. Each triad is assigned applications to review individually, and then they meet with their triad partners. So the first thing is asking each member of the Fellowship Selection Committee to do their own deep analysis and scoring before they actually come together with their triad partners. The triad groupings are themselves constructed in a way to ensure that they represent a mix of practice, academia, other kinds of setting, and also that have various experience levels within the committee. So we try to have both diversity in practice and backgrounds, as well as experience levels in the Fellowship Selection Committee represented within the triads. And those groupings are changed annually, really to accomplish that objective. The leadership of the Fellowship Selection Committee then reviews the scores that are submitted, and then the full committee comes together for a final selection committee where robust discussion and final decisions are made on those who will move forward and those who will not be recommended for admission. The final step is that those recommendations from the Fellowship Selection Committee then go to the Board of Directors of the Academy of Nursing, as outlined in the Academy bylaws. I think on the next slide, you'll see a bit about the acceptance rate. You've already heard Gloria noting that there's no quota for fellowship selection and the number of folks who can be accepted in a given year. You'll see some variability, and that has occurred over the last 4 years, as you can see here, that there were a range from the low number was 2023, that there were 398 applications received, and the high number was in 2025, there were 458 received. We're excited and hope that the number of applications will only build, and that with that will come the ability to continue to grow the Academy. The acceptance rate varies a bit too, from a range of the lowest was 54% in 2024, and the high mark was in 2023 at 66%. So there's a range and some variability there, but again, no established acceptance rate for fellowship, and each individual is selected because the Fellowship Selection Committee believes their application really did showcase their individual, significant, substantial, and sustained contributions and impact through their application and their sponsor statements. And then I'd also like to mention that the Fellowship Selection Committee is not able to provide specific feedback about back to candidates who are not selected for fellowship. But we do say that and really want to stress that if you're not accepted during your first application cycle, please don't give up. Please work with your sponsors, work with mentors, do some personal reflection to see where the strengths of your application may have been, how else you might be able to bolster it. And please do apply again. It's pretty common that people apply more than once. I also will share that the Fellowship Selection Committee has no line of sight to who has applied before. And I will also just add that the there's many folks in the academy who I think are pretty transparent about the fact that it's not easy to kind of swallow and keep going if you weren't accepted the first time, but there's plenty of people who will encourage you and say, this is common and please do apply again. So again, work closely with your sponsors, other mentors, and continue to pursue academy application and membership. I think my transition point is back to Stephan again here, and I will pause. Thank you,
Thank
Stephan.
you. Thank you. Excellent points there. And, as we think about not only the application process, but then the next phase, if you're selected for admission to the academy, at Induction, it really is a new beginning. So, as you walk across the stage and officially become a fellow of the Academy, you then are expected to use your expertise to advance the Academy's work. And this is actually something that you have to speak to in the application process. You see application question number 3 here on the screen. So it's you stating how you're going to be active with our organization in terms of policy, research, evidence-based practice, innovative solutions, as we think about solving the biggest challenges in nursing, health, and healthcare. So as we move on, before we dive into our Q&A, and I see that we have a lot of questions coming through and we're excited to answer those, please continue submitting questions if you have them. I do want to also invite you to learn more. So you can take a look at the information that's available on the website. You've obviously taken an important step today by joining this webinar. We encourage you to get engaged with us, come to the Health Policy Conference, and look at how you can connect with current fellows. We have our conference on October 8th through October 10th right here in Washington, D.C. All are registered to register and attend, so you don't have to be a current fellow. Certainly encourage everyone to consider attending. And we are actually, as an EDI committee, hosting a welcome reception to kick off the event on October 8th. So I know that we're talking primarily about induction because our remarks today are centered around the application process, but the Health Policy Conference is not just a celebration of those new inductees. It's really a premier learning and networking opportunity. It brings together over 1,000 of the best and brightest in nursing and an opportunity to learn from industry leaders, interact with health policy experts, and participate in breakout sessions, again, addressing some of our most pressing healthcare challenges. This year's theme is digital health. And again, you can purchase a ticket for the full conference. You can look at just the induction ceremony or soiree. So we're going to be dropping links into the chat, and I hope to see many of you there, particularly at our EDI welcome reception. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Ellie as we begin our Q&A.
Thank you, Stephan, and thank you everyone for remaining active during the chat. We've received quite a few wonderful questions, so we will just dive right in. And I'll start us off with a question that I think has shown up a few times about the readiness. How do you know you're ready to apply? And in particular, how do you handle when sponsors are asking to sponsor you, but you don't feel ready? So I'll hand that off to Stephan and Gloria, and we can all just kind of chat about that.
Yeah, I think that that's a great question and one that comes up often. And I will say that when people were encouraging me to consider applying, I really grappled with whether or not I was ready, as Gloria also shared. So I think that especially for people on the earlier end of their career trajectory, it can be quite daunting because you look at people who've done so much over a period of time and you wonder, how does my career trajectory align with that? And it doesn't necessarily have to line up exactly in terms of timeline. So I think that that's important to remember. I think that one area that sometimes is confusing for people around the application is that, it's not just about doing really amazing work. We know that everyone who's on this call today is likely doing extraordinary things in their organization. Part of what you have to address is your individual or unique contribution that typically we're looking at. How does it extend beyond your role, your official role, what you're paid to do, for example? So thinking about how expansive that is, or if you're primarily focused on your work in your organization, did you establish a national model? Is it something that could be scaled to make broader impact? And how do you frame that in terms of your narrative? The other thing that I think is really key when you look at whether or not you're ready, the impact also has to be sustained. So I think that we may all have different assessment of what that actually means, and it might vary based on what the impact is. But I do think perhaps a good rule of thumb or starting point might be in the 5 to 10 year range that we're looking to see not only that you did this big, amazing thing, but that it continued, it grew, and you continued to make that impact. Gloria?
I would echo pretty much all of your statements. I think one of the most important things is for you to, I know there's a lot of people that believe that they're not ready, and I myself included. And I think you can be very honest with yourself. And if you say you're not ready, that is completely okay. You don't have to apply right then and there, and you can take some time. So like that's a very key portion. Be very honest with yourself about, well, what am I trying to do? What is my goals of however my nursing career is going to be? I think that honesty and reflection for yourself is probably going to be the most important thing for you to really consider if you're ready or not. And I would say the second part is just write it down. Like just literally write it down. Like, see, can you try to answer these questions? And if you're almost there, like maybe you just need more time. Like it really is a very individualized process. I think you've heard from all our varying stories that there is no one pathway forward. There are plenty of people that didn't feel ready until they were much older in life. And certainly I didn't feel ready myself 15 years within nursing. But this is an extremely individualized process. I think it is very hard to compare if you have colleagues that you work with that are getting it or colleagues that are never going to get it because they have no interest. But make sure you figure out within yourself, like, is this even something I really want to do? And then just be quite honest with yourself and just write it down and see where that takes you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Gloria, for that point. I think it's really important. And Laura, I think you shared as well that it took a few iterations for your application to come together. Any additional comments you want to provide?
I would just say start writing, and so help yourself get in motion, um, and actually answering the questions, and really, I think that helped me understand my impact and how much was already there. And I wished I had done that sooner because I think I was more ready than I recognized. And I think I was too cautious for too long. So that would be my one piece of advice, Ellie.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then switching gears just a little bit, we've gotten quite a few questions in the chat about how to find a sponsor, or my organization doesn't have many fellows. How do I get in contact with someone to sponsor me? I think I'll start with Ernest, who had his sponsors help out a lot with his application. Ernest, if you want to take that away.
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot of times the sponsors will come to you. So this is sort of tail into the previous question, is that sometimes people see the qualities in you that they recognize this is what the academy is about, and this person would be an excellent addition to the academy, which is what happened in my case. Was my sponsors came to me and said, "Hey, have you thought about applying?" Um, I think though, if you can always, there's always someone that you would know who is probably a member of the academy. Look at either your local university or your local healthcare facility. There are people that you would know from there. Also, just you can look at the academy list. It could be that there are people that you have either worked with over the years or have published papers with over the years. Those are individuals that you could approach and ask about, if they would consider being a sponsor for you.
Thank you, Ernest. I also think we've really emphasized how vital the sponsorship statement is throughout this webinar. Just want to echo that as well. And just let everyone know, as Stephan mentioned at the end of the presentation, the Health Policy Conference is open to everyone, fellow or not. And that's also a great opportunity to network and learn more about the people in the Academy. So I will ask Stephan this next one. How do you really differentiate between your significant versus substantive contribution? As a member of both the EDI and FSC committee, I think that you can help handle this.
Yes, and well, I'll also invite our chair and co-chair to add in. And I think that sometimes these words and the definitions can sometimes overwhelm people. But please do look at the application and the definitions and talk with your sponsors and really make sure that they have a good understanding, because as Ellie was also highlighting, your sponsor, you could have the most beautiful narrative and write about your significant, sustained, substantial contributions. If your sponsor's statement, both of them, do not underscore and amplify what you have outlined, then it likely is not going to be a successful application. And I don't know if our chair and co-chair will agree for our fellow selection committee, but I think of the application when I was applying myself, I thought of it as a triangle, right? That I'm trying to tell this cogent narrative and make sure that the sponsor statements align with that. And they're sharing different elements of my journey and why they believe that I'm worthy of fellowship, but it all needs to connect back together. And it's really important that you're also making sure that the CV reflects what's in those narratives and sponsor statements. So it's looking at that alignment and how you perhaps share different vantage points, but ultimately you're telling the same story.
Great. And Laura,
Oh,
maybe you could add, or Ernest, sorry, did
no,
you have something?
we'll let Laura go, and then I'll speak.
Okay.
I think I'm going to reemphasize what Stephan just said about alignment. So um, the components of the application all serve to amplify your impact. So you want each piece to be strong. You want your statements to be strong. Make sure that the statements that you make are substantiated by the content that you put into the CV and the application itself. And I think for the sponsors, having sponsors who have been impacted by your work, ideally you've had a relationship with this person for a period of time, but sometimes people do work in more narrow specialties, and they may not have had a lifelong mentor who is a sponsor, who who they have a long-term relationship with prior to sponsoring them. So I think finding that line of sight between the sponsor statement, the content of the application is maybe the most important piece that the Fellowship Selection Committee is looking for. The congruity, I guess, is what I would say, Ernest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say that for the third time, this is coming from Stephan, it's coming from you, and now it's coming from me.
Mhm.
If I were a sponsor, you should not. You don't want the sponsor to sort of like cut and paste what you wrote. They need to accentuate it even further, or give it from a different angle. And I think Stephan's, idea of thinking of it as a triangle is a great way to look at that. But you do not want to just take the same thing that the applicant has put on their application and essentially write the same thing again. You've got to look at it from a different angle, especially how closely you've been aligned with that work as well, and et cetera, is a great way to look at that.
I think amplify is the word that
Yes, amplify.
can maybe be most helpful for people to keep in mind. How does the
Yeah.
sponsor statement amplify the other pieces of the application?
Yep.
Great. And just in the chat, I just want to mention that for more information about the definitions, that's all available on the Academy's website. And I believe that we'll drop another link to the chat in case it got buried. And then kind of related to this, how to amplify impact, especially when your CV might not, reflect it as well as it could be reflected in narrative form. How do you also really highlight your impact when you aren't coming from the traditional academia, or you might not have access to fellows in a university setting? I know that we've had members of the audience comment that their background is in policy, that their background is in research, or more clinical in nature. Gloria, any advice from our CRNA on the panel?
This is where I truly believe in the power of professional associations. And besides, most people just think of as your educational conference, the place where you get your CMEs or anything like that. This is really where you're finding like-minded individuals. And a lot of them are people that do have the FAAN credential. And those are the people that can fully support you. So certainly while I am 36, 40 hours a week in the OR room, and then some of the other times I'm in like a classroom setting, I still have a lot of colleagues, friends. They're all around the world, and I can reach out to them at any point. And that's primarily because of professional associations and professional organizations. You're going to make those connections through that way. And that doesn't necessarily mean only just professional associations too. You can meet them in a lot of different various ways. Organizational help, certainly, if you have a club, an interest, anything like that, that is going to be a way for you to create that connection with someone.
Stephan, any other advice?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Gloria has already shared. I think that really looking at, how you craft that narrative, how you're building relationships, how you're connecting with people in the academy. And, it's so important when you're thinking about how do you tell a story that might be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the profession, but really distilling that down into, a narrative that's going to be compelling to 3 reviewers. So again, beginning early, what has been emphasized, starting to write, starting to think about who might be good sponsors for you, all really critical in this process.
Ellie, I was just going to
Yeah.
add to what Gloria had said also. In addition to professional associations, which I agree with, board service has been another important component of where I have benefited, where I've grown, and where I believe I've been able to have impact, both in practice and policy kind of work. So I think that that's another area for people to really think about. How are they involved? What have those contributions looked like? How has it shaped nursing and healthcare, improved healthcare overall?
Yeah. These are great examples of how to network within and without your within and outside of your network, excuse me. So I think another question that I've seen pop up in various forms is how do you kind of get over this kind imposter syndrome? I know that we've talked about you don't feel ready, that your sponsors are more likely than not to push you. How do you really make sure that you do feel confident and that your sponsors are supporting you in the way that you need to be supported to have a successful application? Ernest?
Yeah, thanks. I think, well, one, again, the fact that, well, sometimes people see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And if you're hearing that again and again and again, it's time to believe yourself, or believe what people are saying about you. I think we've had great examples too of each of us as we've gone through the application process ourselves. And, as I stated, it was difficult to write about me. I think that's who we are as nurses, is that we don't give ourselves enough credit for who we are and what we do, but other people recognize that. So yes, and even as Laura, mentioned that she did, writing things on the wall and, and actually maybe just visualizing it is one of the things to, convince you as well. So, obviously though, if people have come to you and have said, have you considered, applying to the academy, or you ought to apply for the academy, or, things like this, it's like, that's that knock upside the head that you need, and so that you can get over that imposter syndrome, and fill out the application. And even if you don't, or if you're not successful in the first try, as we've stated before, don't give up. Try again as well. So that's the best that I can give there.
That's great. And I think that that's a perfect segue for another question I've been seeing pop up again and again is how do you get over that initial rejection should it happen? I know that Laura mentioned that the fellow selection committee does not see if an applicant has applied before, and similarly, they do not see what level of career their sponsors are at. The sponsors are blinded. So, how do you kind of get over that initial rejection? How do you stay motivated to apply again? Because it is hard to keep that motivation going.
I
Well,
can speak. Oh, you want
go
to
ahead.
speak to that too?
I'll just say very briefly again, I think it goes back to the advice of Dr. Grant here to me years ago. Going into it, of course, we all hope that you're going to be successful on our first try, but certainly you do have to look at the reality and the acceptance rate. And so thinking about, maybe you have a 50 to 60 or 70% likelihood of acceptance, and really making sure that you are following the application guide to the T, right? Making sure that you're following all of those instructions, all of that guidance, attending things like this, talking with sponsors. But, really important for you to go into it with eyes wide open. And that way you're not disappointed and you understand that this too is part of the process. It's part of the journey. And I will also say that I've known people who are incredibly impressive, who don't get out on their first, second, or even third try. And it says nothing about whether or not they are doing important work for the profession and for healthcare. Sometimes it's about not really outlining the connection to policy or not writing the narrative in a way that really differentiates what your individual contribution was or the significance of that impact. So, I think that really making sure that you're going into it with a healthy mindset as much as possible. And if you get in, that's wonderful. If not, don't let it define anything about your worth and what you can contribute.
I would like to add in, I didn't get in my first go around, and it was, it was not a positive experience. I would say, like, I didn't feel good about myself, but it took a little bit of time for me to recognize that this is not a marker of who I am. And when I took a little break away from just looking at my application again, I realized it was the way I was writing it and the narrative, like everything that Stephan was saying, like it wasn't as there as it could be. And it was really just recrafting it, rethinking it. Like I didn't suddenly change to become a new person within the year of time frame. But what I did change was the way that I was trying to reframe it. I could say very certainly when I look at my first application, I felt like I was doing this and throwing anything across the wall and seeing like what would stick. And then my second go around, and that's the one that I did get into, then I realized like I do need to kind of craft this narrative and give this idea of like who I am as a person. What am I trying to represent? And from my first one, I couldn't even see who I was myself. I just saw things I did. And looking back, like, yeah, I think that really made a big difference. certainly it's hard to get over that first hump of saying like, oh, I didn't get in. And again, it is not a marker of who you are. It doesn't diminish you. It could really just be you need to recraft it, reframe it in a
Yeah.
different way. So I would give that would be my personal story for it.
And I would add to what Dr. Chan has said is that reemphasizes what I had said about my process, and that we started early, and I underwent probably 4 or 5 rewrites of my application. And when you look at the first versus the last, yeah, it's totally different. And that's why for those of you who are considering applying for next year, you need to start now writing out your application, and it should undergo at least 3 or 4 rewrites, and then look back, because it's like you are trying to say in very few words, because I think it's only about 600 words or so that you can use to try to get your who you are across to the reviewers. So yeah, word choice, and maybe ask yourself, you know, does this really, reflect what I've written here? Does this really reflect what I've done? Is it does it substantively show my sustained work and my impact?
Thank you, Ernest and Gloria and Stephan, for helping answer that one. We're getting close to the end of our time, so just based on some of the other questions in the chat, I really want to emphasize, and Laura and Ernest, I think will agree with me, we really are looking for applicants from any background, any level of experience, really just showing that you've made an impact and that you have a through line in your application that highlights the impact that you've made.
Let me also, Ellie, just add that I've seen in the chat a couple of times folks from international asking, is there an international, can you apply from another country? And yes, you can. We do have a international selection committee as well. So don't let the fact that you're not here in the United States or Canada as part of that. So yes.
Ellie, I'll chime in too, because this was the first year that we used the 3 S's, if you will. And some questions have reached both Ernie and me, and I think others, about was that a helpful construct, or did it somehow inadvertently become too narrow? And I think the intent, and we're going to continue to work with this model and work through it, but that it would be equally accessible for people who have very broad backgrounds and people who have more specialized backgrounds. And we will continue to support the Fellowship Selection Committee applying that model and those tools in just that way. There are some people who are very specific, deep experts in a more narrow focus, and therefore have big impact. They may be the world expert at a certain specific area, and then they've been able to really have impact through how they've disseminated it, how they've changed practice, education, policy. And then there are some that have very diverse points of impact. We need both kinds of fellows at the polarity, if you will. So we need to continue to work on that, think about that, and support the consideration of how this framework gets applied across all applicants.
Great. Thank you so much. I think this has been a very well-received conversation, and I really think that you all have been very generous in offering your stories and time, and I hope it has been as helpful for the applicants and potential applicants as I feel it has been.
We're at our wrap-up and conclusion here. I'm Connie Win Trung from the EDI committee. Thank you again to our speakers Stephan Davis, Gloria Chan, Ernest Grant, and Laura Wood for being with us today. And thank you to our audience for your engaging questions. I would also like to take a moment to thank the members of the EDI committee for proposing this webinar and supporting the planning process. And finally, I would like to thank the Academy staff, including Ellie Cook, Claire Holland, Jaden Archuleta, Miranda Harris, and Carolyn Kane for their support. And as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and will be sent to the audience in the coming days. And the Academy will also publish the recording on its website and YouTube, where you'll be able to share this with colleagues. And please stay tuned. Later this year, the EDI and Fellow Selection Committee will be teaming up once again to host a part 2 of this webinar focused on sponsoring candidates to apply. Thank you.